We had several people ask us if Bill Gothard and the Institute of the Bible Life Principles were connected to the Latter Rain movement.
Yeah, so Bill Gothard might be a name that our audience isn't familiar with. He's not someone I don't believe we've mentioned him at any point in our series. But he is a fairly famous evangelical type leader. He's probably most well known for a set of homeschool programs that he created, which were really very popular among a lot of Christian homeschool groups in the 1990s and into the 2000s. And Bill Gothard developed a really large following around what he called the Institute for Basic Life Principles. And he presented it as something both educational and religious. And the Duggar family on television, they're from that TV show 19 Kids and Counting, they used his homeschool material, and at a certain point, they joined his movement. Now, it doesn't seem like they were always part of his movement. There was a point in time when the Duggars were more normal Christians, but then at a certain point, it seems like they joined his movement, and which, I mean, in all honesty, is a cult. So at some point they joined a cult during the middle of their program. And so as you look at Bill Gothard's teachings, they bear a striking resemblance to the teachings of the shepherding movement. And if you recall, the shepherding movement is one of the main branches of the Latter Rain movement. It was started by elders out of Sharon Orphanage in combination with Ern Baxter, who was, one of William Branham's most important partners during the early years of his campaigning. And they produced the shepherding movement as you come into the late 60s and 1970s. And from what I have looked at, just the resemblance between the shepherding movement teachings and Bill Gothard's teachings are very striking, especially in their basically their formula for leadership. So the shepherding movement teaches you that you basically report up to your shepherd, and then there's all these different layers, and you can only grow and be protected in the Lord if you stay under the subjection of your shepherd. Okay, and then the shepherd guides your life, and it's not just simply a pastor over a whole church, but it's like even within a single church, you have like a pyramid structure within a single church, and then multiple churches pyramid together all the way up to, they had this ring of leaders at the top, which then shepherded the shepherds, which shepherded other shepherds, which shepherded other shepherds, which ended up shepherding the individuals. Well, Bill Gothard had a very similar strategy. He called it umbrellas of protection, and you had to stay under your umbrella of protection, and then it's the same thing. Each umbrella has a bigger umbrella over top of it until you get all the way up to the top, and you've got your biggest guy at the top, which is Bill Gothard. So it's basically it is so remarkably similar to the shepherding movement, and even the language and terms that are employed. It's almost ripped straight out of the shepherding movement, some of that stuff. And so I feel very comfortable in saying that Bill Gothard was somewhere along the way deeply influenced by the shepherding movement. And I've also read that Bill Gothard was in contact and worked a bit with both Ern Baxter and Bob Mumford in the late 60s and early 70s, which were two of the leading members of the shepherding movement. So I think it's a pretty safe assumption to say that Bill Gothard was at some level influenced by the shepherding movement.
For me, this question is interesting because it is the equivalent of asking, was America influenced by the American Revolution? You've got this movement that literally impacted the entire world. The Latter Rain movement was a cancer that spread among all American churches. Whether they adopted it or whether they refused it, in my opinion, both sides still were influenced to some extent by this thing. And it really couldn't help to be, because there was so much hype around it, and there were so many people who got in it and were influenced by it, realized it was heresy, and then left it, and then they went on to better movements. And some, I'm not saying that they're all cults, but some of them created non-cult Christianity, but still had some of this influence, and it lingered. And so it was like this cancer that spread. Was Bill Gothard directly influenced by William Branham? I think that is a question that I don't have an answer to. I don't think there's any publication that would suggest that. But this thing that was created, that the latter rain movement was built upon, influenced several people, and Bill Gothard was one of those people. I recommend the book Freedom of Mind and Combating Cult Mind Control. I actually start with Combating Cult Mind Control. You can get it on Amazon. What you'll find is there's a cult framework that exists. And that cult framework, even though the Bill Gothard cult looks so similar to the message, you can almost pull up any cult throughout history and they'll say, that looks similar to the message. This also looks similar to the message. Scientology, it looks similar to the message. Well, the framework is exactly the same. And whether devious minds are doing it on purpose or they just fall into some error and they happen to create the same structure, the cult structure exists. And if you look at Combating Cult Mind Control, it fully explains how the cult structure works and how it morphs and cross-pollinates, and it, throughout time, this will continue forever. So, yes, it looks the same because technically, if you rip off the doctrinal aspects of Bill Gothard's teaching, it is the same. It just has different elements of doctrine bolted on top of the cult structure.
Right, and that is something I think a lot of people, when they, especially the message, like when we examine one message group to the next, or we examine one latter rain splinter group to the next, they tend to go and look at the doctrines, and they say, well, this doctrine is 5% different, this one's 10% different, this one's 30% different, it's not the same movement, but that just kind of ignores the reality of how these groups come into existence, right? Somewhere someone was influenced by somebody and they learned something from them, and they took that and they replicated parts of it. They didn't replicate the whole thing, they replicated parts of it. And so you get part of your influence from William Branham, you get part of your influence from Father Divine, and you're Jim Jones, right? Like you don't pull it all from the same place. And so it's the same with Bill Gothard. It's definitely true, he's not fully influenced by shepherding movement. There's elements that are not from the shepherding movement, and if you dig far enough, you'll probably find out where those come from. But you can see that these people pull together elements of this and that from different areas and produce a movement. But you're right, at the very core of it, you have the same framework. You have a framework that allows all of this to happen. And that framework is almost identical across every single cult, right? And when you're in the cult, the only thing that matters to you is doctrine. Doctrine, because you're indoctrinated. But when you're free from indoctrination, then you're able to step back and just look, how did this thing work? And then when you see the framework of how this thing actually worked to control people and indoctrinate them, that framework is largely the same in every single cult group, right? Some of them they tighten the screws a little more here or there, but the basic framework for pulling it off is the same, really, from group to group.